Hi, everyone. Welcome to another conversation that matters. I'm Heather Carter,
And I'm Dr. Shad.
and we are glad to be back here with you today. And I wanted to sort of pick up where we left off with the last conversation that matters and talk about an experience that I had right before the beginning of this public health crisis. So, Dr. Shad, in I think it was February, I visited a local public high school and had the opportunity to teach 4 classes of culinary arts.
Mm.
And this was a fantastic experience. The students were so incredible. They actually were the state winners of a program and were on their way back to DC to compete in a culinary arts program. And of course, that was canceled. But one thing became apparent upon the initial conversation is that our students have never heard of the SAD diet. You know what the SAD diet is, right? What is it?
Oh, absolutely. Well, it's actually an acronym for the Standard American Diet, and
Right.
it's appropriately summarized as very sad.
And they had never heard that. So we started out with our conversation in that classroom about what did you have for breakfast?
Mm,
And you would not believe what the students were pulling out of their backpack.
mm,
First and foremost, everything was in plastic. There
mm.
were, a package of donuts. Even the fruit was prepackaged in plastic. And it was funny because we started to have a real spirited debate about, well, this granola bar is really healthy, also in either somewhat sort of a plastic wrapper of some sort. But in reality, it's just another example of the sad, you know, diet that we eat here in the United States. So we're talking about some of the statistics around what does a daily diet look like for the standard American. So the SAD diet includes what? Very little fruits and vegetables, right?
Absolutely. So the breakdown actually, the USDA actually did a breakdown of this standard American diet, and they found that they broke it down in terms of a pie chart and the different percentages. So the smallest percentage, with only 12% of our standard American diet, is plant-based.
Wow.
Another 20 some percent is basically animal based. But the large proportion of the standard American diet, 64% or more, is actually processed food, what we call processed food. Now, processed food can be vegetarian, it can also be meat based, it can be a combination. But the point is that it's processed. So, what does that mean, right? So, processed food is like your, French fries that are kind of that are cooked in very high temperature hydrogenated oils, or your Twinkie. These are all processed foods, right? And so I actually don't really consider them to be real food. I actually call them frankenfoods
Oh,
because
that's
they're
very good.
really just kind of like an experiment, right? They're just sort of um, ingredients that are meant to actually increase the shelf life of the product,
Hmm.
but aren't necessarily good. And in fact, in most cases, are actually harmful to human health. But they do increase the shelf life. So, one example is hydrogenated oils. So, fat, as you know, is very sensitive to both temperature and pressure. And hydrogenated oils, each fat has, and we're going to talk in the future about more about fats and carbohydrates and proteins and how you can kind of understand what real food looks like. But with fats, you have a carbon backbone. And so that backbone of carbon has hydrogen atoms attached to it naturally. And you have different types of fat, and we'll talk about it. In hydrogenated oils, hydrogenated fats, they take high pressure and high temperature and they force a hydrogen onto that backbone. And by hydrogenating and forcing that hydrogen on there, they increase the shelf life of that product, by 200 to 300%. So when you could take that same product that would go bad, let's say within a matter of weeks, now it won't go bad for 6 to 9 months. And so a customer today, right, you would still have a customer 6 months from now for that same product because it still hasn't gone bad. But unfortunately, these oils, these hydrogenated oils, are inflammatory. And what they do is they actually cause oxidation and damage to your cholesterol in your blood. And that damage actually is the beginning part of the process that leads to heart attacks and strokes.
And it's just shocking to think that this is what we're feeding our kids.
Right.
And if you spend a lifetime of eating these franken foods as you're describing, no wonder we're seeing the same statistics that we referenced in the previous conversation that matters around high blood pressure and diabetes at younger and younger age in the American population, which creates a tremendous strain not only on our healthcare system, but for individuals and their families. And so, you have to really think about these food choices that we're making. And, when you look at the packaging, it was just, funny to have this conversation with students of saying, well, my oat bar is more or healthier or less calories than your bag of donuts. But on both ingredients list, you would see something with hydrogenated and then fill in the blank. And
Right.
so it's almost like a bait and switch game of making people think they're eating something healthy, but you really have to look at the list of
Yeah.
ingredients to know what you're really eating.
Yeah, and like one example of that is the whole gluten-free. Like these are kind of little things that they will add, right? You could have a food that's a very unhealthy processed food, but then they put a label of gluten-free on it.
Right.
So obviously, there's some people have issues with gluten, but just because a food is gluten-free doesn't suddenly make it healthy.
Right.
Just like French fries are also technically plant-based, but they're not really plant, right? They're hydrogenated oils that are damaged, that are, very much unhealthy actually. So that's kind of, one of the things that we have to look at when we think about reconnecting with our food. We're really talking about reconnecting with real food and understanding the difference between franken foods and real foods.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up because as we're sort of reopening up the economy and people are transitioning from stay at home orders to going back into their daily lives that they had prior to the pandemic, you know, they are starting to stop and think, well, when I was home, I made different food choices than I did prior to the public health crisis. And now, what choices will continue beyond as we continue to open up the economy? And while we were home, we were able to really reconnect with our food. And I'll just give an example from many years ago, because obviously we're not using animal products in our house anymore. But on one Christmas season, we were making cookies, and you start reading the ingredient list, and you can buy cookies, and you can look at the ingredients, and you can see a lot of hydrogenated oils in them, or you could make cookies. And so I thought, well, I'm going to be, the mom that's going to make cookies for Christmas. And next thing I know, 4 cups of sugar. It's like, whoa! You start to really realize as you begin to cook food yourself, what goes into making these recipes. And we did all of our cooking at home during the stay-at-home orders, but would go out on a bike ride. And as we were biking by a restaurant, I won't name the restaurant to call them out on here, we joked like, wow, that smells good. I go, yeah, but that's really just nothing but the smell of burning fat and deep frying food.
Right.
And so we have an opportunity, during this pandemic to be able to stay at home and really think about what we eat. And I'm hoping, and are you seeing this in your patient population, where people are now maybe just grabbing the apple rather than grabbing something that is, made with apples, but also with all this hydrogenated oil.
Definitely. I think one of the silver linings, hopefully, of this pandemic and people having to stay at home in the last several months has been, and I have noticed it among patients, is that they've actually been forced to recognize where their food comes from.
Right.
And because you suddenly are aware of the fact that there could be a challenge to our food supply, we see the continual issues and updates that are coming up with the meat processing packs companies and places where people are getting COVID-19, and how our meat supply is tainted by that. And it's limiting, right, the amount of meat that you can get. I think people are starting to experiment more with ingredients, just like you did for the cookies, where they're experimenting with recipes at home. And it's something that's unfortunately been a very negative trend in the last 30, 40 years, is the fact that people have lost the ability and will and patience, quite frankly, or understanding to cook at home. And we've really gone from a culture of cooking at home to one of just kind of eating on the go, whatever we can get, without thinking about what impact that has on our individual health, what impact that has on the environmental health and the community health. And we just kind of get whatever we can. And so I think this opportunity has really been eye-opening for a lot of people,
Right.
to really be able to reconnect with where their food comes from, what food you need and what food you don't need, right? In
Right.
the setting of a pandemic and limited trips to the grocery store, or having ordering food, right, in groceries to come to your door, you really start thinking a lot more about what you're getting and what you're not getting. And also economically, people have been challenged, right? Because of the unprecedented numbers of unemployment. And so people have had to ration also their budgets in terms of what they have and what they don't
Right.
have. And then you really start to pay more attention to it. And then I think you start learning about certain staples and certain basics
Right.
and healthy foods that you need as a matter of course, and you know, maybe you don't need a lot of the other stuff, although there has been also some folks binging a little bit more on some of the unhealthy stuff too, to be honest with you as well. So I think there's all sorts of kind of reactions to it, but one of the hopes I have is that we're reconnecting with real food and starting to recognize the difference between real food and frankenfoods.
That's a great point. Reconnecting with real food. I mean, if we ever had a hashtag or a takeaway from each one of our conversations, is that it's, given us the opportunity to really reconnect with real food. And what's interesting is in conversations with friends and family and my daughter's friends from school, we get a lot of questions of, well, what are you eating at home? As if, eating a whole food plant-based diet is challenging. It's actually easier during a pandemic to eat a whole food plant-based diet than to try and make fancy meals to replicate what you would buy out in the stores. And it's, I think, more cost affordable as you described. So buy the bananas, buy apples, buy your broccoli. We talked about during the pandemic with a group of students, have a broccoli Monday. Try to get broccoli in three different meals a day. And just, if you buy the basics, the whole food, it can actually be more manageable. I know myself, this is just me. When I see either a complicated recipe or think about what having for dinner, it's overwhelming. You think it has to be this fancy, grandiose meal to serve for dinner, but it doesn't. We bought a big 50-pound bag of rice, put it in a plastic trash can with a bag to seal it up. And we've just been scooping out rice and putting rice in with every meal, mixing a variety of different vegetables and some sort of a fruit or a concoction of a cookie type thing for dessert. And we don't feel deprived, and it's whole foods. I think that's what people kind of miss, is that they want this presentation and it's all about the marketing and everything that goes around it. But we need to reconnect with just real food. So I hope that's what we see happen.
And I think one of the things that's important for people to keep in mind, what is real food and how do you know the difference?
Right.
And I think different people have talked about it. I give different rules for my patients in terms of how to distinguish it. And so one of the things that people may have heard before, but I also tell my patients, is if you can't pronounce an ingredient, right, in the food, or if your grandmother wouldn't know what this is in terms of whatever chemical or additive or things that it is, then it's probably not a real food that you shouldn't be eating. Another guideline is having fewer ingredients, right? So real food tends to be less than 5 ingredients that you can recognize. And really, it's about avoiding a lot of the prepackaged foods that are pre-prepared, because most of them add a lot of these other ingredients that are not real food, and then they become a processed food. You've heard from different people, have probably seen some of the different documentaries, great documentaries that are out there about food and medicine and health, where they talk about eating, going when you're shopping to look at the periphery of the grocery store, which is where the produce is, when the real food is, versus a lot of times the aisles and the shelves have a lot of the prepackaged food that has a lot of those hydrogenated oils and other compounds that are meant for increasing shelf life, but are not really real food. And so I think that's something that people need to recognize the difference. So even just making those adjustments, I think you had said one of the questions that you had gotten was about what was it?
Mountain Dew.
And what was it? The question
The question was, is Mountain Dew good or bad?
is Mountain Dew. So is Mountain Dew good or bad? And yeah, obviously we're not going to be proponents of so soda has a lot of challenges to it. Okay,
Right.
so it's very high in sugar, which is one of the issues that we you identified in just making the cookies. I mean, there's so much I think there's on the order of like closer to like 8 to 10 tablespoons of sugar in one
Wow.
regular bottle of soda. So they've actually you can actually look at it. There's some places where they've actually broken down the amount of sugar and just filled the bottle with the amount of sugar that's in it.
Wow.
So it's a
You
high
could
amount.
probably YouTube that.
Yeah, you probably could YouTube that. And then the other thing is that if you think that you're getting away with, eating something quote unquote healthy by having a diet version, right? We see all the problems with that too. In fact, you think about the soda being a big contributor to diabetes and obesity, which a lot of studies have shown that it is. But also, they actually did studies with diet soda, and they did one where they looked. One that was particularly noteworthy was where they compared diet soda with regular soda in patients with diabetes and a propensity to develop diabetes, and you had an increased risk of developing diabetes with the diet soda even more than the regular soda. Which goes to the chemicals that are added to those the artificial sweeteners that actually fool your body, confuse your endocrine system. And actually now one of those ingredients, which is aspartame, which is in a lot of processed foods, has actually been shown to be toxic to our microbiome, which is a good bacteria in our gut and throughout our body. And actually we know that's a big impact. I'm sure we'll do one session just talking about the microbiome, but but aspartame's toxic to it. And so, so be careful of processed foods and know the difference, right? To look at the ingredients, make sure it's whole, real foods that you understand. And then, really there's so much resources out there in terms of recipes, and a lot of those recipes, I'm sure with your cookie experience, you can substitute. You don't have to put that much sugar into it. You can put a little bit of maple syrup. You can put a little bit of honey. We just made some banana bread the other day when we didn't even add any sweetener. We just used bananas.
Right.
And so you don't need to add any sweetener to that. And some walnuts, right? And things like that. So you can still.
Well, I really think, the message of this conversation that matters is about taking the opportunity to connect to your food, and hopefully that food is real food that your grandmother would recognize and that you can pronounce. I think that's the big takeaway from this conversation that matters. And, obviously we are all suffering from this pandemic, and some more than others. And our heart goes out to families that have lost loved ones. Yes. And we appreciate the frontline workers, whether it be in healthcare, emergency responders, and those working on the front line of just our food source, in the grocery stores and all the retail shops. So this is a time for all of us to really kind of reflect upon what we can do to make, in this particular case, a healthier choice. So reconnect with your food, and hopefully that food is a whole food and one that your grandmother would recognize. So thanks for this conversation that matters. And I wanted to queue up 2 other conversations that are on our calendar coming up for some people that are listening to send us questions if you are an athlete. My daughter is a college basketball player, and she has started a page around fitness as well. And so she's getting a lot of questions there. And this is a great opportunity for people who are either an athlete or are interested in working out. We're here to answer your questions. And if we can maybe kind of cut through some of the marketing that is out there around food, this is an opportunity to get your questions answered directly. And then the second conversation we were talking about having is really diving into the notion of food as medicine. That's your mantra. It's something that I talk about a lot. I also talk about you can't outrun your fork, but what does it really mean to be focused on food as medicine and how it can hurt or help you from a physiological standpoint? So that's
Yeah,
what's on the books.
and I look forward to getting folks questions from people. And I think, as we talked about, please follow us on our
Yes.
social media pages. DM us in terms of messages that you have, questions that you have, and we'll make sure to cover them in a future conversation that matters.
Thank you. And Dr. Shad, your Instagram tag is, I think, Dr. Shad9.
Yes, that's right.
Perfect. And mine is Health with Carter. I'll also be sharing these to Facebook pages, and we're just going to continue to reach out because we want to be a resource to you and have continual conversations that matter around food and health. So thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.